Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Today I wanted to complete lesson 12. I started it the other day. We worked on the mission um, with Camera Raw. Now we're going to go ahead and I started retouching this woman, starting and going back and forth between Photoshop and Camera Raw, but I didn't complete this lesson. So I'm going to start it over again and do her in total and completely. So you get an idea of how to work. We start by opening up her file in Camera Raw by going to Bridge first. Something that you might not be aware of when we're in Bridge is that if you want, we can look at this image and look at the metadata for her. And it's really, or for any of these images, and it's pretty astounding with digital cameras what's available. For example, if we look over to the left here in metadata, you can see that this was taken, you can tell what kind of camera it was taken with. You can see the file name, the file type, that it is a raw image, and we can scroll down and we can start to look at all of this pertinent data. How big the file is, when it was taken, the date it was created, the date it was modified, on and on and on. And when you scroll down to look at the camera data, it's pretty astounding what's available with most digital cameras now. You can see that the focal length was 62 millimeters. The lens that was taken was a zoom lens from 24 to 70 millimeters. You can see that the f-stop was 2.8. You can see that that the flash didn't fire. You can see that it was the time that it was taken exactly. With some cameras, there's even, it has a GPS coordinates that can be added to it. Or if you're, I don't know how many of you, like using your smartphone to take snapshots, but that records the GPS data, so it knows exactly where the location where it was taken. So it's a lot of really, really nice information that you can, that's built into this digital negative is what we're working with. Really pretty nifty. Okay, so let me go back to the film strip. And as I mentioned, you'll notice that it's a .nef file. That just means that it was taken with a Nikon camera. It's the raw file for Nikon. If we were to go into, let's see, I think the mission was taken with, let's see, yeah, a CRW. So that's a Canon raw file format. I don't know what Sony's is, but I'm sure that they have their own. And for any of you fortunate enough to get a brand new iPhone 12 Pro, they now, Apple has its own raw file format as well. So, what a raw file is that it's basically layers of data that you can digitally alter. And it's equivalent to having all of these features that you would normally have to do in a darkroom. But now we're doing it in Photoshop or different, ancillary programs in Photoshop like Camera Raw. So let me go back one step and let's select her again. And if you just double click on it, it will open in Camera Raw. On the other hand, if you want to open a JPEG in Camera Raw, you have to right click on it. And then when you do, you'll notice that it says open in Camera Raw. I believe that they did that because there are a number of digital cameras that save the files in JPEG file format, and they don't give you an option to save it in Camera Raw. They don't have that as an option. But that allows you still to go in and to change and to manipulate all of this metadata. So as soon as I double click on the little icon of the image, it opens up in Camera Raw. And as I said, Camera Raw has changed a bit. So even they published the 2020 textbook, and it still has the appearance, the old appearance of an earlier version of Camera Raw. But if I scroll up here and we take a look at this, where I have the basic settings, and you can see that it's broken down into all of these little twirly tabs. But if we look at the basic setting, the first thing that they want us to do is to find the white point in here. So the white point, you know, there's a white point and a black point. The white point is the lightest part of the image. And then we'll get some, even just doing that, we'll get some major color corrections in here. So if I select this little white balance eyedropper, and I come over here and I select probably one of the lightest parts of her image, you'll notice that that changed dramatically. And again, if we come down to the bottom and we look at the, go back to the original, and we toggle back and forth, or if we look at it, the before and the after, notice how much greener her skin tones are in the way that the image was shot. So if you wanted to leave it that way, I guess you could, but there's no point in doing that because these are all the things that you would do in a dark room anyway, to make some final adjustments. So a few more things that they want us to do in Camera Raw before we take it over to Photoshop, and then we'll bring it back to Camera Raw again, is that they want us to change the exposure. We're going to bump it up a little bit because maybe it was underexposed. So we're going to go to 0.3 and lighten it up a tad, and look at, even with that, we're making considerable changes. We're going to increase the contrast of it a little bit. So I can come down here, and that's going to go to plus 15. Okay, so that boosts the range between the lights and the darks. And then we're going to increase the crispness or the sharpness of it with the clarity. So we can go ahead and we can do that. We're going to bump that up by, I think 8 is what they want. So there you have it. We have that we've done. And now we're ready to take it over to Photoshop. But we want the ability to take it back. And this is something because I don't use Camera Raw that much. I really rely heavily on Photoshop to make all of my adjustments, because oftentimes what I'm adjusting has been generated in a 3D modeling program or outside of digital cameras. It's using Camera Raw, or not Camera Raw, but it's using maybe what I've taken in an earlier version of my iPhone. So to open it up as a smart object, you hold down the Shift key and then you click on Open. And now it will open it in Photoshop, but it opens it up as a smart object. So now what we can do is we can begin adding some adjustments to it. And then if we need to, if we double click on that icon, we can go back over to Camera Raw, make some adjustments and come back. So what they want us to do is we're going to use the levels here. And you'll notice at the bottom, this is our, what we have here is our whatchamacallit, I can't think of the term, histogram, there we go, of this. And it's a little sketchy, but if we click on this little button right here, it allows us to smooth that out, and we make some minor adjustments in that. And then what we can do is we can go back and we can edit the saturation of this in Camera Raw. So we probably want to tone down the reds a little bit. We want to do a few other things. So to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to double click on this icon. And then we'll bring it back to Photoshop again. But I'll double click here. Come on. It takes it back. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to scroll back up here so I can change and I can close basic. And what I want to do instead is I'm going to use the color mixer here. So in the color mixer, I can reduce the reds a little bit. And we can work with the reds, oranges, yellows, we have quite a range, going around the color wheel for us to affect. But we're going to go ahead and reduce the reds just a little bit by -2. And again, if you really want to see the effect of this, you can go back, and that really changes it. And if I go to the other direction, notice that it brings it back to something a little bit more green. So when you're doing this yourself, we have the textbook here as a guide that tells us specifically what numbers to plug in. But later on, what you're going to want to do is to slide it back and forth, and then you'll find a happy medium for yourself. And again, take a note, of the histogram at the top as we're making these changes. It will show you, the peaks of the reds are at the top, and we want this, more evenly distributed. The oranges, we're going to knock down 2 by about -10, 10, 11 or so. There we go. To get a better handle on this, and we're also going to change the magentas. So we're just going in the reds, and we're knocking these down a little bit. And this is going to go just -3. And again, I'm using the book just so that I match what we get for them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Photoshop. So I'll just click OK, and that will take us back to Photoshop. And we can use some of the healing tools that are available to us in here. Now, what I would prefer to do, we can leave this, I suppose, is the camera raw or the smart object. But what I would prefer to do is I would duplicate the layer. So I'm going to go ahead and just with it selected, I'm going to hit Command J, because some of the features that we're going to change, or some of the tools that we're going to use to make the changes, aren't available when it is a smart object. So I'll hit Command J, that makes a duplicate of it. So we can always go back to camera raw if we need to, but we can turn that layer off for the time being. And now we're going to take that smart object, and I'm going to come up to Layer, and I'm going to go to Smart Object, and I'm going to rasterize it, bottom down here. And now I can go back and I can do some retouching in here. And this is kind of where we left off before. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we'll start by taking off the little decorative diamond that she has in her nose. We'll remove some of her moles and that sort of thing. Not all of them though. And I think I pointed that out last time too, that you don't want to take everything away, or it looks unnatural. The person really looks kind of like a corpse when you're done, and that's not the desired result. So I'll take the spot healing tool, and I need to bump it up a little bit. So right bracket key and make it a little bit larger. Just go over that and click, and it's gone. And maybe bump that up a little bit larger again, and we'll click, and it's gone. If we want to get rid of this one, I'll make that a little bit larger and click, and that's gone. If you want to get rid of a few others, you can, but not all of them. Just the ones that maybe are in the light, if they're in the shadow, just leave them. So I'm going to leave some of those there. Okay. So there we have that. Change the brush size a little bit. What I should have done to make sure, and I already had it selected, is make sure that you have content aware selected when you're using the spot healing brush to make sure that you get the best selections there. So we've made those changes. Next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to use the dodge, burn, and sponge tools. Now, those are found over here, okay? So here's the dodge tool, okay? And probably one of the things that we want to do, a couple of things. Dodge tool will allow us to take some of the shadows out where they are, and we can also increase the brightness or the intensity of the colors by using the sponge tool, or you can desaturate colors as well with that. We can also highlight her brow a little bit by using the burn tool. So that's what we're going to do. So I'll start by using, zooming in a little bit so we can see her eyes a little bit better, because that's what we're going to focus on at the moment here. So I'm going to take the dodge tool and I'm going to work in here. Right now I have 45 pixels. Exposure is 100%. Maybe I should drop that down a little bit. I'll take it to maybe 40, 50%. Don't want to overdo it. I mean, you can always undo, but we can take in here and you can see that if I move that in here, and that's really overkill, that's way too much. So I don't want that much. I'm going to drop that down to maybe 10%. And I forget what the book wants, but I just think that's a bit too much. Just a little bit. And we'll do that on the other side here. And even what I've done might be a little bit too much. Okay. The next thing that we'll do is hidden underneath that is the sponge tool. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make her eyes just a little bit bluer. And you got to make sure that it is, see, I goofed. I'm going to go ahead and undo that a couple of times. Desaturate is selected. I want to make sure that it's saturated. So you can go either way with the sponge tool. You can either turn it into areas into a black and white image, or you can enhance the colors and bring out the colors a little bit and make them a little bit stronger by using that. And again, you don't want to go overboard with it. That's why I've set the setting to 50%, just enough to bring the blue out in her eyes. And then in her eyebrow, her brow here, her brow ridge, we're going to add a little bit of a highlight to that. So instead of the sponge tool, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the burn tool. And I'm going to bump this up a little bit, make it a little bit larger. And let's look, yeah, 24%. Just really quick, no. Other way, I want, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the dodge tool. So I need to make that a little bit larger. Yeah, just very subtle increase. I kind of maybe have gone overboard just a little bit. Click here. If I have to, just undo a couple of steps and do it again. So if 10% even is too much, drop it down to 5%. And come over here with a big brush and just very subtle change. So we've made some nice changes to her, not gone overboard. Okay. The next step is that what we want to do is we want to, because we can, this was taken with such a good camera and a sharp lens, we can see every pore in her face. And that really is sort of unattractive. So what we can do is we can drop down the blur it a little bit, and we can also, because her face is still a little bit too red, we can also change that a little bit. So to do that, and to make sure that we just select mostly her skin, let me zoom out a little bit. Actually, I'm going to change that one little thing here. I'm going to go back and I'm going to take this blemish away on her forehead. There we go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the select tool, and what I want to do is I want to select color range. And when this comes up, what we want to do is not under selection, but what I want to do is not sampled colors, but I want to select skin tones. Now, what we can do is we can make sure that the fuzziness is selected to around 10. That's what the book recommends, and that's a good place to start. So I'm going to go ahead and detect faces, okay, with a fuzziness of 10. But basically what that does is it detects skin tones. How well it does with for persons of color, I don't know. Because I don't know if you've read much lately in the news about um, uh, uh, you know, facial detection systems, you know, for and how that they don't do such a good job with especially Hispanics or you know, Latinos or Latinas and African American individuals. So there are flaws in it. So I don't know how it will do. So they've, you know, carefully selected, you know, an attractive Caucasian woman. So it works really well for her. And so you can see that I have her selected. And so now what we can do is on top of this, I can add an adjustment layer. And we can go to, I think they want us to, I'm going to use curves. Okay. And when I use curves, instead of RGB, I'm going to go to the reds. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to, if I crank this up, notice how I'm increasing the reds. Well, I want to drop it down a little bit and take some of that out. So it just a smidge, and that's it. Okay. So it drops the red, so it makes her just a little bit less, you know, red. Not a lot, just a little. And if you know, that's something that, because it is editable, we can always go back and play with that a little bit. And where it starts clipping, you don't want that. So let's go back again. Just a little bit. That ought to do it. Okay, so I think for our purposes, that will be okay. So the next thing that we want to do is we're going to take the region that we created here. Let me think here. We got that. So I changed our adjustment layer. I need to make a copy of, because I want to apply a surface blur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back again, and I just want to apply a surface blur to the area that we made with the start copy here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take, because we affected just her skin tones. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a copy of this one. And let's see if this works. So now what I can do is I can come up here and I can go to surface blur. So let me go to filters and I'm going to go to blur and I'm going to select surface blur down here. Let's see if this works. And I don't want it to be 100%. I just only need this to be maybe, let's see, maybe radius of, 5 pixels and a threshold of 10, something like that. And that should affect mostly her face. That's what I want to affect. And you can see that it just changes it just a little bit. And now what you can do is that you can zoom in if you want. You can see how that's affected it. And if you'll notice that you no longer see her her pores the way we did here. I'm toggling on and off that layer. Okay. It also affects her eyes. So what we want to do is come back with the eraser tool on this level, on this layer. So I'll come back here with the eraser tool and I can use a nice big brush here. And I want to go back in and I'm going to affect her, erase from this layer. I'm going to affect, her eyes. So that gets totally erased. And that brings it back. And you'll notice when you do this yourself, you'll see a subtle change. Because it's not a significant one, but it's enough. You want her eyes to be nice and sharp. So after editing that with the eraser tool, the next thing that I want to dial back the blur just a little bit. So after adding that, we can go ahead and I can, and I probably should have checked with the eraser, the degree of hardness. And the flow for me was 100% opacity. And that really is okay for me. It's not a big deal because I wanted to get rid of all of those features from her eyes. The next thing that we're going to do, though, and the last thing that we'll do with this is we're going to adjust the opacity of this layer, because we don't want everything blurred. We just want it just a subtle blur. So on that new layer that we created, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change the opacity of that to maybe 40%. So we don't go overboard with the blur. And you can see it brings back a little bit of the graininess of her skin, and that's it. So we're really pretty much done with this. And it's only taken me kind of a half an hour to do this. I have another video that I'd like us to watch today. That's by Ed Heckerman. I guess the last step that they wanted us to do on here is to take all of these layers and flatten it. Now, my approach to doing this is a little bit different than theirs. I'm going to select the first layer, hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to turn on the back layer, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key again and click so that they're all selected. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Shift, Option, and Command key, and then I'm going to hit E. And what that does is it adds a flattened layer to the very top, but it keeps all of our original layers intact. So now I have a retouched version of her. We could always go back to this first version and compare. And you can see, you know, the significant changes here. We've taken out some of the reds of her skin. We've removed some of her blemishes. We've blurred her face just a little bit so that the pores become less obvious. If you want to enhance, you know, her lips and make her lipstick redder, you can always go back in and make all kinds of changes in here. Okay. Now you'll notice here the highlight in her brow isn't working. So I messed up a little bit here, but I'm going to leave that. So that should be, you know, that needs to be gone back and corrected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording for a second, and I'm going to bring up Ed Heckerman's, where he uses, because Ed, I don't know how many of you have had Ed for photography, but when he teaches digital photography, he talks extensively about how you can use camera raw as your digital darkroom. So, you know, since you can't take, you know, digital film into a real darkroom, you have to use camera raw extensively. So that's what he does. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm just, as I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the recording for a minute. Not going to zoom recording. As I start playing Ed Heckerman's video, I will stop the recording again. But what I will do is make his video available in my playlist so you can continue to watch it. And he goes over it quite extensively from a photographer's perspective. Ed is certainly a fine artist. I'm not a photographer. I was an illustrator years and years ago in a previous life. So when I play with these settings, it's more from an illustrator's point of view, not a photographer. And there's a slight difference. So let me go ahead and I'm going to pause the recording again, and we'll play Ed's video for you. Okay.